Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us once again on Dojo Live, connecting with tech experts like you. My name is Kim Plantis, broadcasting live from Hermosillo, Sonora, in one of Nearsoft's 3 offices. My teammates today are joining me, Dojo Live regulars Carlos Ponce and Tulia Siragusa. Hi, guys.
Mexico City.
Mexico City. Hi, also at Nearsoft. Usually you're from your home office. I noticed that. He's at the office too. Hey, Tulio. Where are you today, Tulio?
Hey, I am in downtown LA. I'm at the Marriott in the lobby near the Staples Center. I'm here for a conference, the Focusrite Travel Tech Conference.
Okay.
So that's where I'm at today.
It's a big week this week.
Yes.
So talking about today, today we're going to be exploring the 4th age, or more specifically, smart robots, conscious computers, and ultimately the future of humanity. Okay. Today's guest has authored 2 books on the topic, and he also regularly hosts some podcasts on the topic as well. So please welcome Byron Reese, the CEO of Gigaom. Welcome to Dojo Live, Byron.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. So, Byron, to get us started, please tell us a bit more about yourself, your background, and what it is that you do at Gigaom.
Gigaom is a technology research company, so we help enterprises kind of cope with this changing technological landscape in the world, and that includes technologies like AI.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good. Thank you. And how about you? What's your background? How did you get into all of this?
I've been fascinated by technology, I guess, my whole life. In fact, I think it came to me from my interest in history, of all things. It's like, how did people go from savagery to modernity? And I think it's because we learned this trick. We learned how to use technology to multiply what we're able to do. And for some reason, that just really intrigued me. And I decided I wanted to make my career in technology. And so one way or the other, I've always been associated with it.
I like this idea of history because I think it has this nice segue into my first question for you, actually. And so you have to excuse my ignorance, but your topic for today is this idea of this 4th age. So if you could catch me up to speed on what the 1st, 2nd, 3rd ages are and what is meant by 4th age.
Well, it's unfortunate that I came up with the 4th age at the same time a bunch of other fourths came out. and everybody's 4 things are different. So there's no reason in the world you would have any idea what I meant by that.
Okay, well, let's talk about the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and
So,
your perception of the 4th.
Right.
We should definitely compare notes, Byron.
All right.
I published mine 10 years ago. Let's hear yours.
Okay. So my take was that, you know, technology is always kind of enhanced what people are able to do, but every now and then some technology comes along that's such a big deal that it just changes everything, like forever.
So there's fires, like the first one, or what?
No, actually, I think more sort of. So I would say the first one was brought about by fire. When we got fire, we started cooking food, and that let us grow the brains we have, and that gave us a language. So our first great technology was language, and it's hard to imagine people without language because that's how we coordinate our activities. Then the second one was brought about by agriculture, but interestingly, I don't think it was agriculture. Agriculture gave us the city, which is a kind of technology. We settled down, and the city gave us the division of labor, and the division of labor gave us prosperity. And so first we could communicate, and then we were prosperous, and that just is a whole different world. And then the third one, I think, happened because of a giant coincidence in history, and that is coincident with each other. 5,000 years ago, both writing and the wheel came about. And those 2 technologies together give you the nation state. And that's why 5,000 years ago, just like that, like you can set your watch by it, you got these empires that just sprang up everywhere in Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica and the Indus and the Po and all the rest. And so I think that we have 2 technologies right now that are going to bring about a 4th age. And if you were about to say things are about to change, but they've only changed, you know, they're of the order of magnitude of language and, you know, prosperity. And I think they're artificial intelligence and robotics, because with those technologies, we kind of outsource what our brains do and we outsource what our bodies do. And then you have to say, well, if you do that, then what are people at that point?
Okay. Very good. How does this coincide with your 4th age, Tulio?
Well, it's interesting. I mostly focused on the time it took, right? So from the agricultural age to the industrial age, it was like almost 10,000 years. And then from the industrial age to the information age, it was only like 40, 50 years. And then from that to where we are now, which some could call the age of the self or the higher consciousness, or really the spawn of, the heightened consciousness, it's been less than like 2 decades. So there's like a speed that's just, it's incredible how fast they're moving. And I'm just curious, your thoughts, what's going to happen with more robotics and more AI? I mean, what's the implications in terms of what's happening next? What's the 5th age?
Well, I have a chapter in the book called The 5th Age. And what's interesting about the book I wrote is it never actually tells you what I think about that question. Because what I was really interested in is not, I didn't want to just be some guy out there with an opinion saying, you should think like I think. I was very interested why so many people had such radically different views about that world. Why is Elon Musk afraid of AI? Why was Stephen Hawking and Bill Gates? And then you get AI researchers who think the kinds of things they're worried about are not just not true, but they mock them, like they're ridiculous. And so I got very interested in why people had such different takes on this. And what I discovered was that it wasn't that these people know different stuff. They don't have special knowledge. It's that they believe different things. They have different beliefs about people and about humanity, about the nature of reality and all the rest. And the central assumption that a lot of people who are concerned about AI have is that people are machines, that your brain is a machine and your mind, whatever that is a machine, and consciousness, however it comes about, is mechanistic. And they had this kind of reductionist view that if you just sliced people down to tiny enough parts and figured out how those parts work, you could build a mechanical human, and then that mechanical human could get better as time passes. So it all kind of starts with what are we, and I never weigh in on that. I don't think anybody's hiring me to tell them whether they're a machine or not. I think they know, they have an opinion about the question already, and my job as an author is to walk through the implications of that.
Interesting. I think it's fair to say some people go through life fairly robotically. But ultimately, what is your thought in terms of how that can be best utilized for the advance of humanity? What are your thoughts in terms of what are the best applications or implications for AI that benefit everyone, that doesn't put everyone in a spin?
So I'm bullish on the technology, whether you think it's, I think it's without a doubt a good thing. And I think it's very hard to make the alternate case. And let me clarify that. 25 years ago, the Mosaic browser came out. And all we did with that was learn how to connect computers together with the common protocol. I mean, they didn't have any brains. They could talk to each other. And that created $25 trillion in wealth, a million new companies, countless jobs, and all of the rest. AI is a technology that makes people smarter. Philosophically, what it is it says, let's take data about the past and study it and make projections about the future. And therefore, anybody with an AI-enabled tool is smarter than before. Now, to argue that doesn't benefit everyone is to argue for ignorance. If it would be bad, if somehow everybody woke up with 10 extra IQ points tomorrow, which is kind of what AI does, is it empowers us, makes us smarter. You would have to argue that it would be better if we all woke up with 10 fewer IQ points tomorrow. And I just don't see that. I believe that knowledge is power, and AI makes us smarter, and that you can't spin that into a negative way.
Which is, unless you're talking about the distribution of knowledge and power, and then it can become a very negative thing.
Well, sure. That being said, if you lived in ancient times, you were a king in ancient times, you could, and then you look at what technology has brought all of us. What it's really done is it's democratized all of these things that used to only be available to the elites. You know, if you lived in the olden days, you You could have a band play you music whenever you want it. Well, now everybody can. And you could have smart people telling you, answering all your questions. Well, now everybody can. You could have, and the idea that this device can download a piece of software that makes anybody can diagnose illness or fix anything or all of the rest.
Mm-hmm.
It is an empowering technology to everyone. And to try to, I resist all of these things that try to pit groups against each other. AI makes us all smarter. AI is good because it increases human productivity.
So I'm one of those people who agrees with you. I'm curious about, you make a comment in your book that we're at a turning point in history where technology is poised to redefine what it means to be human. What did you mean by that? What it means to be human? How does AI change our definition of what it means to be human in your thoughts?
You know, we have these brains we don't understand. We don't know how you encode a thought. Like if I say, what color was your first bicycle? Nobody knows how you recall that or where it's stored in your brain. And then we have these minds that somehow we have these capabilities that are pretty unusual. We have a sense of humor. Your liver doesn't have a sense of humor, but somehow your brain does. Like, where does that come from? And then we have consciousness. And what that is we experience the world. A computer can measure temperature, but it can't feel warm. We can feel warmth. And so we don't know why it is that can happen. Why can matter experience anything? So there's been a debate as long as there's been debaters as to whether we are fundamentally mechanistic, whether there's nothing about you that you're just a big bag of chemicals and electrical impulses that walks around. There's nothing about you that can't be reduced to an equation on a whiteboard. And that's a hypothesis that we're going to know the answer to at some point relatively soon. If we can duplicate everything that humans can do, if you make a machine that is creative and witty and feels warmth and all of the rest, then we're machines. That's what we are. If you can't, in spite of all that we have, then that also tells you something about humans. You don't have to necessarily go into some spiritual realm for people not to be machines. We could be emergent in a way we don't understand. We could be a quantum phenomenon that can't be reproduced in a factory anywhere in the world. We can be all kinds of things. But right now, the proposition on the table is we are machines that can be reduced to a series of operations, and we can build one out of silicon.
Well, I tell you what, if the machines can learn how to make art, abstract art, or really cool art, I'm gonna definitely get an upgrade. So how do you explain the thoughts around things that are not basically equation based, right? You got an output, you get a result, and that's pretty much something you can have a machine replicate. But what about art? What about what some call art or love or romanticism? Where does that come into the picture, in your opinion?
Well, it's an open question to start with. There's a number of theories about that, and one is that those are emergent phenomenon. And what emergence is when a system takes on attributes that none of its components have. For instance, none of your cells is smart, but you are. Like, where did that come from? Yeah, a beehive behaves smarter than any bee. An anthill, an ant colony is very smart, even though every ant isn't. No ant is. And so this is this phenomenon called emergence that we understand kind of what it is, but nobody really, I don't think, gets it. And because it feels almost like a something for nothing proposition. And so one idea is that we're emergent, is that we are, draw a circle around that, call it whatever you want, but we are another one of those phenomenon where somehow the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And in that, people would say, comes creativity and so forth. I have a podcast about AI. And when I put it to AI researchers, is an AI going to be able to write a best-selling novel? they're like, oh yeah, of course. Like why couldn't they? I mean, to them, it's almost there's a big debate about how special we are, and there's a group of AI researchers who don't think there's anything particularly special about human creativity. That we all just kind of copy from each other. It's all derivative of each other. I think if you, intuitively, that's not satisfying. It doesn't explain, well, how did Lin-Manuel Miranda write Hamilton? Like, where did he get that from? And it's like, but they would say it's all. Look, if you just start with, you have a brain made of neurons. Those neurons are governed by the laws of physics. Therefore, everything you do is laws of physics. Don't try to dress it up any more than that. And that's like that viewpoint. But then you say, well, there are all these things that it doesn't seem like that provides good answers for. And that's the debate that I'm very interested in.
Yeah, it's a very interesting debate for sure. I mean, in Eastern philosophy, there's a talk about, mastering the ego, right? Where's the ego come from? Because if it's not something that exists in the brain, where's it come from? From your, I recently saw this article. There's a Chinese newscaster that has actually implemented an AI-based, I don't know what to call it, humanoid, that just basically studies videos and reads all day long and then provides a newscast. What are some of the applications you think that can come sooner than later? Because there's general AI, people argue it's 80 years away. What do you think are some of the things that can be beneficial today? Things that are missing that could be of value today?
So you're right to make the distinction between general AI, which is a technology we don't know how to build. And actually very few people are working on that particular question. Most people are working on narrow AI. How do you use AI to solve one specific problem? And because AI is trained on data about the past, the kinds of problems it can solve are ones where the future is like the past. So it can identify cats very well because a cat yesterday looks like a cat tomorrow. But there are all kinds of problems that they don't necessarily behave quite that way. Now, I believe we've known about this phenomenon of Moore's law, that computers double in capability on a predictable basis. What happens is that it turns out all technology behaves this way, not just computers. They don't all double every 2 years. It might be every 20 years or every 8 months or whatever, but they double and they double and they double and they double. And if this is true, and by the way, nobody knows why it's true, but it seems to be, what it means to me is it will solve all technical problems, all problems that are purely technical, and many aren't, but all problems that are purely technical will solve. And so to answer your question, I believe you'll live to see the end of disease, because that's a technical problem. You don't have to have it. You'll probably see the end of aging. I think people only grow old for between 4 and 8 reasons, and those all appear to be technical. It doesn't have to be that way. You'll see the end of poverty. Poverty is a technical problem. You don't have to have poor countries to have rich countries. You'll see the end of hunger. Hunger is just a technical problem. You don't have to have hungry people. We just have them because we haven't figured it all out. So I would say look around you, and any problem that is purely a technical problem, you're shaking your head. Why is that?
I fundamentally, well, I'm not as versed or studied as you are on the topic, but my gut is telling me that technical problem it is, but I have to introduce this variable of morality and immorality. Because let's talk about poverty, for example. Like, there's enough land mass to technically create enough food, but there's this elements of power and greed and control and whatever that come in that I don't know if technically speaking.
Well, I mean, I'm going to agree with that halfway. It is true that there's 1 billion hungry people in the world, and you can go to the UN's website and download a list of them by country, and 79% of them live in countries that export food. And so you're right. To that extent, that's a terrible thing, that you starve to death in the modern economy, not because you have no food, but because you have no money. That those nations can sell that food abroad for more than their people can afford to pay for it. So to that extent, it's true. What you're saying is true. But all that does is kicks the can down to say, well, then the real problem is poverty. And I do think it is that. And and poverty by any measure is down. In 1980, there were 4 billion people on the earth, and 2 billion of them lived on less than $1 a day. And now there's 7 billion people, and less than 2 billion live in abject poverty, which has been defined upward because of inflation.
Right.
So we've added billions of new people on this planet, and we have less people in abject poverty than we did in 1980. The UN, as a matter of fact, we're hitting the goals that they set for eliminating poverty so quickly that they're having to kind of be more aggressive. So if you say, well, where does poverty in the end come from? You can say that. You can say, well, it's the power people and it's the institutions and it's all of that. But in the end, it boils down to human productivity. In the end, people can only get paid as much as the value that they can create. And when you live in an area that has no infrastructure and has all of the rest, it's very hard to be a productive worker and to compete on equal footing with other productive workers.
But then isn't that a juxtaposition if then there's machines who are implementing and creating that productivity rather than a human being? What is the human being supposed to do?
If it were that dichotomy, but I don't think it is that. What happens in reality is, I believe, people take those machines and they use those to empower them. So in the developing world, if you had to pick any place to be bullish on, it's like, who's going to benefit in an economy where everybody on the planet has a cell phone, right? I mean, there are more cell phone accounts than there are people. And when those things can download software that can empower anybody in any language, who's going to really win out over that? Does on a relative basis, does that help somebody in the developing world, or does that help Bill Gates more? And it's like, the person in the developing world has just been empowered with these great new technologies. So look, I agree with you about there's a lot of hurdles, but if you say, what's the best way to solve them? I think the best way is to empower people
with technology.
Well, it's an interesting argument. I think the beautiful thing about technology is it doesn't introduce when you take out the moral aspects of things, you also take out the ego. So there's no win or losers. There's no thought process on how do I get this to benefit me. It just solves the problem for what it is, and it can look at it on a much broader perspective. So I think in some ways, if that's the argument, we would definitely benefit by having the insight from something that doesn't have any emotional or moral or egotistical objective at all in solving a problem. I mean, it seems to me all these things we've talked about, there's roots in it with some beliefs that don't necessarily serve us anymore, but somehow we still hold on to them. Do you talk about that a little bit in your book, Byron, or is that something that's come up?
Yeah. No, a lot. I mean, what I really wrote was a philosophy book about AI. And that's a big question, because it would appear at first glance, you're right, that somehow we remove ourselves and our egos from the equation. But in the end, somebody does decide what data to train that AI on. And and then all of a sudden, whatever the AI says is kind of beyond question. Well, the AI said it, like, it must be right. And so we just have to be very careful about what you want to feed the beast, because depending on what you give it, you're going to get certain answers out. But again, what compare that to the present situation where, we're a bunch of irrational people who are full of all of these, we have all these like bugs in our mental code, like the rhyme is reason effect. People think something's true if it rhymes more often than if it doesn't. I mean, there's so many things like that AI is immune from. It at least is studying data. And the only real question is, well, what data are you giving it?
Well, I guess
the ability to take emotion out of it.
Yeah,
which is the whole time we're having this conversation, I can't help but, I'm sure you both are familiar with the movie I, Robot, right? Will Smith. Yeah. And the part where when he talks about his experience of losing his arm and how his arm is anyway, and his argument that his car goes off the bridge and a car with a little girl goes off of the bridge, and the robot chose to save him because he had 45% probability of surviving, and hers was like 15 or something. And so the robot chose him. And his thought as a human is that was the wrong choice. Like, you pick the kid.
So a human would have known instantly. You go for the kid.
That's the element of
But that's just all stuff we're going to learn to deal with. What we want, you know, what we want is to be knowledge is power, and this is a technology that, if you think about it, the history of the human race is we learn things and forget, learn and forget, learn and forget, learn and forget. And
We
what we
do?
have now is a
Sometimes on a
technology
daily basis.
that says all of our lives are going to contribute data for a colossal memory that we're all going to learn from. And every mistake I make will help make other people in the future not make that mistake. And that's a profoundly good thing. And I think trying to make it something fearful or bad really shortchanges a lot of good that's going to come from this. I do believe that in that, you know, what Gene Roddenberry said about the future, there'll be no hunger and there'll be no greed and all the children will know how to read. And I think if we really want to build that world, that this technology is a big part of that.
I think it's going to be a fascinating read. Definitely want to encourage anybody watching this, pick up the book and read it. Should be a very interesting conversation with yourself as you read it, for sure. You know, there's a lot of people who subscribe to the idea, I being one of them, that earlier in the time of humanity, we were more connected in one consciousness, and somehow that changed. And I think, is your thought that with this technology, we could get to a place where we are sharing collectively a more connected consciousness so that we get to see the outcomes of certain decisions faster, which would hopefully make us a little smarter about the decisions we make? Is that ultimately the goal? I mean, of how we could leverage this to benefit all of humanity, in your opinion?
I mean, I do think we're doing a great job of connecting people together. I mean, we are connected over the internet, and that is kind of a beating heart of our collective being. If emergence is true, and if 100 billion neurons somehow make you, those neurons don't know that you exist. They don't have any idea, and there could very easily be a consciousness that we can't perceive, that, you know, we're individual cells of as well. Who knows how far up that goes? What's that?
I was like, this is like the theories of parallel.
No, it's something called the Gaia hypothesis.
Yes, that's an interesting.
That says perhaps all of this living planet is a single entity. It's a single life form. Again, I try to explore all of this in my book. I never weigh in, not because I'm coy, but because I want to ask people a series of questions that pull out their values and their beliefs. And then my job as a technologist is just say, here's what that implies. And so if you read my book, The Fourth Age, you know, you're not getting a lot from me in terms of, you're not going to come out having any idea what I think, but hopefully you'll have a lot more clarity into where your own beliefs lead. That's my goal in writing it anyway.
Allowing your reader to make their own decisions based on the.
It would just be presumption from me too. Sometimes it isn't. You know, if you go to the doctor and say, "What's wrong with me, doc?" and the doctor says, "Well, I want to leave it up to you," you know, you go elsewhere. But when it's fundamental questions like, "Are you a machine? Do you have a soul?" All of these things, those are the things that matter. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter at all what I think. But I just think I can help kind of walk those through. Like, well, people who believe AI is going to take over the world believe this. People who are afraid of it believe this.
It's interesting, those questions, when you say it doesn't matter what I think, but it matters what everyone thinks. Like, like it matters that I come to a conclusion and have my own thoughts on the topic, but it doesn't matter what your thought is. But I think it's questions that are worthy of us discovering what we deem to be the answer. Because the truth is nobody knows, but it's important to, I think, have considered these things, which is...
But I think to your point, Byron, I mean, depending on what you've been exposed to, have studied, whether it's quantum theory or the Kabbalah or whatever, right? There's plenty of different beliefs that have said before, we're just an illusion. We're an holographic image of our consciousness. We actually are not really here, you know. And some of that stuff is very esoteric. You're like, that doesn't. How do I grasp that, right? But I think what I'm hearing is, in this book, you present the idea that if you take away all that fantasy and you break it down to just simple zeros and ones technology, you could actually begin to remove, the fantasy or the romanticism and begin to look at the facts on how can we use this to benefit things that really matter, like solving the problem of poverty, hunger, etc. So, we're coming up on time. It's always a fun thing that happens when we're having a good conversation. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on, how has this impacted your business, the clients you do business with? Are you getting into more of these kinds of conversations? Which
not really. Really, what I think the way it's impacted my business is when people say AI, they mean one of two very different things, and one of them is iRobot and her and all of that, and then
I
they
call that
mean
fantasy because that's not even here, right?
right, or they mean machine learning and how do I use that to improve my business, and that's what I do. That's my day job. That's what Gigaom does. Is we help companies do that, and so the book isn't a business book. It's about how to think about these technologies, and maybe it helps a business to that extent is that it tries to sort through what all this kind of means, like why is a computer a big deal, I mean, like, anyway, but it isn't directly written to be a business book.
Great, thank you. So any words of wisdom you'd like to share with us before we end the conversation today?
No, other than these technologies are going to save people's lives and make people, have a better standard of living and many good things. And so we should always tread cautiously, but we can finally, I think, bring about. People have dreamed of utopias for thousands of years, and we're going to be like the first people that actually could do it. And it's just a matter of will at that point.
That would be really cool. Carlos, Kim, do you guys have any additional questions?
No, it's just been a very
more time. This is
additional questions. No, but it's been a very, very fun and interesting talk today, Byron. And I thank you for your time and for your insight.
Oh, it was a lot of fun.
I think, Tulio, the only thing is maybe, I mean, I know we're running out of time, but if someone is watching this interview at a later time on our website, if you have any additional questions for Byron, you can send them on Twitter, right? And that's easy to do. And
is it time to show the chatbot?
I think it's time to show off our chatbot, which you coded personally. So that gives you the right to activate it with the red button.
Okay, here we go. Ready?
Yes.
Boom.
If you have any questions for Byron, and just watch our chatbot here scrolling through the screen. Twitter. It offers full Twitter integration. So just go here to Twitter, DojoLIVE, send us your questions for Byron, and we'll just follow up on those, okay?
Awesome.
Questions for Byron right here on DojoLIVE on Twitter.
Ponce, don't remember, you're just a machine.
Julio, can you deactivate it, please?
Okay. Where's the robot? I'm missing the robot from last week.
No, that's at my home office. I'm at the office today.
All right. Well, Byron, thanks for joining us today. Really enjoyed the conversation. Where should people pick up your book? Where can they get it?
Oh, where they say all fine books are sold, all over the place. Awesome. And the audio version of it exists at Audible, and you can get it. It's still on the shelves in most bookstores, and of course you can order it online.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you, Carlos, Tulio. It's always a pleasure. And everyone, our users, or excuse me, watchers, viewers, we're talking about users now. I'm all messed up here. Viewers, join us again, regardless of our little quirks. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.